At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law whispered, "Don't cry. He's not really gone. You'll see tonight." Hours later, I found a sealed envelope in his coat pocket with one chilling line inside. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The rain fell steadily against the funeral home windows as I stood beside my husband Robert's casket, trying to hold myself together for what felt like the 100th time that day. 45 years of marriage, and now I was alone. The black dress I wore was the same one I'd bought for my mother's funeral 10 years ago. I never imagined I'd be wearing it for my own husband. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew everything there was to know about my family. I'd spent my entire adult life caring for others. When Robert and I married in 1979, I was a young nurse with dreams of traveling the world. Instead, I chose love and family. I worked double shifts at the hospital while Robert built his accounting practice. Coming home exhausted, but always finding energy to help with homework, pack lunches, and kiss scraped knees. When our son David needed money for medical school, I sold my grandmother's pearl necklace without hesitation. When our daughter Sarah's husband left her with 2 young children, I took out a second mortgage on our house to help her get back on her feet. When our youngest, Michael, struggled with addiction, I paid for 3 different rehabilitation programs, never giving up hope. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. The mother who sacrifices everything, the wife who stands by her husband through thick and thin, the grandmother who remembers every birthday and bakes cookies from scratch every Sunday. Robert used to joke that I had enough love in my heart to fill an ocean. He'd watch me fuss over our grandchildren during family dinners and shake his head with that gentle smile of his. "Maggie," he'd say, "you give so much of yourself away. Sometimes I wonder what's left for you." I never worried about what was left for me. Taking care of my family was what filled my heart. As mourners filtered past the casket, offering their condolences, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. It was Lisa, my daughter-in-law, David's wife of 12 years. She was a beautiful woman in her early 40s, always perfectly put together, always knowing exactly what to say. Today was no different. She wore an elegant black suit and her blonde hair was pulled back in a sophisticated bun. "Mom Margaret," she said softly, leaning close to my ear. Her voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for me. "Don't cry. He's not really gone. You'll see tonight." The words sent a chill down my spine. I turned to look at her, confused by the strange comfort she was offering, but Lisa had already moved away, greeting other family members with that same gentle smile. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling her words had given me. Grief does strange things to people, I told myself. Maybe she was just trying to be kind in her own way. Hours later, after the service, after the burial, after the last casserole dish had been brought to my kitchen and the last mourner had gone home, I found myself alone with Robert's belongings. The funeral director had given me a bag containing his personal effects, his watch, his wedding ring, his wallet, and the dark blue suit coat he'd worn to church every Sunday for the past 5 years. As I held the coat, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still clung to the fabric, my fingers found something in the inner pocket. A sealed envelope unmarked that hadn't been there when I'd chosen this suit for the funeral home. My hands trembled as I tore it open, and inside was a single sheet of paper with one line written in Robert's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, they think I'm already gone." The months leading up to Robert's death had been both heartbreaking and beautiful in their own way. When the doctors told us he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer and maybe 6 months to live, we made a decision together. No hospitals, no aggressive treatments that would steal what little time we had left. We would face this at home, in the house where we'd raised our children, surrounded by the life we'd built together. My alarm went off every morning at 5:30, just as it had for the past 40 years. But instead of getting ready for my nursing shifts, I'd tiptoe downstairs to prepare Robert's medications. 8 different pills, each one carefully measured and arranged in the little weekly dispenser I'd bought at the pharmacy. The kitchen counter became our makeshift medical station, cluttered with prescription bottles, a blood pressure monitor, and notebooks where I tracked his symptoms with the same precision I'd once used for my hospital patients. Robert would wake around 7, and I'd help him to his favorite chair by the living room window. It was a brown leather recliner that had seen better days, worn smooth by decades of Sunday afternoon naps and late-night reading sessions. From there, he could watch the birds at the feeder we'd hung in our oak tree, the same tree where we'd built a tire swing for our children 30 years ago. Our house was a museum of memories. Every wall displayed family photos: David's medical school graduation, Sarah's wedding, Michael's first day of high school before the troubles began. Robert's engineering books lined the shelves, mixed with my nursing textbooks and romance novels. The dining room table where we'd hosted countless family dinners still bore the ring stains from coffee mugs and the small nick where David had accidentally scratched it with his toy truck when he was 5. In the afternoons, I'd read to Robert from his favorite mystery novels. He'd always been a voracious reader, but his eyes tired easily now. I'd pull a kitchen chair close to his recliner and lose myself in the familiar rhythm of turning pages and watching his face light up at plot twists. Sometimes he'd doze off mid-chapter, and I'd just sit there, memorizing the sound of his breathing, the way the afternoon sunlight caught the silver in his hair. Our garden had been our shared pride and joy for decades. Even as Robert grew weaker, he insisted on being wheeled outside in the mornings to check on his tomatoes and my rose bushes. We'd sit together in comfortable silence, him pointing out where the weeds needed pulling, me pretending not to notice when his hands shook as he tried to deadhead the spent blooms. The garden was our sanctuary, proof that we could still create something beautiful together even as his body failed him. The evenings were our most precious time. I'd help Robert back to bed around 8, but he rarely fell asleep immediately. We'd talk about our children, sharing favorite memories, and worrying together about Michael's recovery and Sarah's struggles as a single mother. Robert would take my hand in his once strong fingers now thin and cold, and tell me stories about his childhood that I'd heard 100 times before but never tired of hearing. Looking back now, I realized those quiet months were a gift. We had time to say goodbye properly, time to reminisce and laugh, and even plan for my future without him. Robert made me promise to keep the garden growing, to stay close to the grandchildren, and to never let anyone take advantage of my generous heart. If only I had understood then what those last words really meant, what he was trying to protect me from even as he was dying. The first time I noticed something strange was on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before Robert passed away. I had stepped out to pick up his prescription refills at the pharmacy, something that usually took about 30 minutes. When I returned home, I found Lisa's silver Mercedes parked in our driveway. This wasn't unusual in itself. She often stopped by to check on Robert and bring the grandchildren for visits. But as I walked through the front door, I heard her voice coming from Robert's study, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "Yes, I understand the timeline," she was saying, "but we need to be careful about how we handle this. The old woman is sharper than she looks." I paused in the hallway, confused. Old woman? Was she talking about me? Before I could process what I'd heard, Lisa appeared in the study doorway, her phone pressed against her ear. When she saw me, her expression shifted instantly from serious concentration to her usual warm smile. "Oh, Mom Margaret, you're back already," she said brightly, quickly ending her call. "I was just checking on Papa Robert and making some work calls. You know how crazy my real estate business gets." "Of course, dear," I replied, though something felt off. Lisa worked in real estate, but I'd never heard her use that tone of voice before. So businesslike and cold. And why? Would she call me the old woman to a client? Over the next few days, I noticed Lisa's visits becoming more frequent, but always when I was running errands. She seemed to know my schedule perfectly, appearing when I went to the grocery store, the pharmacy, or my weekly appointment at the hair salon. Each time I returned, I'd find her emerging from different rooms in the house. Once from Robert's study, another time from our bedroom, and once from the basement where we kept important documents. "Just helping tidy up," she'd explain with that perfect smile. I know how hard it must be to keep up with everything while caring for Papa Robert. Her explanations always made sense on the surface, but there was something in her eyes that didn't match her words. A calculating look that disappeared so quickly, I wondered if I was imagining it. The most unsettling incident happened the following Thursday. I had forgotten my purse and returned home just 15 minutes after leaving for my doctor's appointment. Lisa's car was in the driveway again, but the house seemed quiet. Too quiet. I called out her name as I entered, but got no response. I found Robert sleeping peacefully in his chair, undisturbed. Following the sound of rustling papers, I walked toward his study. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see Lisa crouched beside Robert's filing cabinet, rifling through folders with practiced efficiency. She wasn't tidying. She was searching for something specific. When I pushed the door open, she startled and quickly stood up, clutching a manila folder against her chest. "Oh, you scared me," she laughed, but her cheeks were flushed. "I was just organizing Papa Robert's insurance papers. I thought it might help you later, when the time comes." "That's very thoughtful," I said slowly, noting how she held the folder protectively, not offering to show me what she'd been looking at. As she gathered her purse and keys to leave, she squeezed my shoulder gently. "You're so lucky to have family who cares about you, Mom Margaret. Not everyone has people looking out for their best interests." The words felt more like a warning than a comfort, and as I watched her drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa wasn't looking out for my interests at all. That night, as I sat beside Robert's bed listening to his labored breathing, I tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The rational part of my mind, the part that had spent decades as a nurse dealing with facts and evidence, kept replaying Lisa's behavior. The secretive phone calls, the strategic timing of her visits, the way she'd been going through Robert's files. But every time these thoughts surfaced, I pushed them away with a wave of guilt that felt almost physical. "You're being paranoid, Margaret," I whispered to myself in the darkness of our bedroom. "The stress is getting to you." And it was true. I was exhausted. Caring for Robert around the clock, managing his medications, watching the man I loved slowly fade away. It was taking its toll. I'd read about caregiver stress in my nursing journals, how it could cause anxiety, paranoia, and irrational thoughts. Maybe that's all this was. Maybe my grief-stricken mind was creating problems where none existed. Lisa had always been wonderful to our family. When she and David first started dating 15 years ago, I'd worried she might be too polished, too perfect for our down-to-earth son. But she'd proven me wrong time and time again. She remembered everyone's birthdays, brought thoughtful gifts, and always offered to help with family gatherings. When Robert had his first heart attack 5 years ago, Lisa was at the hospital within an hour, bringing coffee and comfort food for the whole family. During the grandchildren's soccer games, she cheered the loudest. At Christmas dinner, she always insisted on doing the dishes afterward. When my sister went through her messy divorce, Lisa was the one who suggested we invite her to stay with us for a few weeks. How could someone who'd shown such consistent kindness and consideration suddenly become calculating and deceptive? "I'm imagining things," I told myself as I arranged Robert's morning medications. Lisa loves this family. She loves Robert like her own father. I thought about all the times I'd seen her holding Robert's hand during his treatment, the tears in her eyes when the doctors delivered bad news, the way she'd brought his favorite pastries from the bakery across town just to see him smile. These weren't the actions of someone with ulterior motives. These were the actions of a daughter-in-law who genuinely cared. Maybe the phone conversation I'd overheard was about a difficult client. Real estate could be a cutthroat business, and Lisa often dealt with demanding customers. The term "old woman" could have referred to anyone. and her presence in different rooms of our house, well, she was trying to help, wasn't she? With Robert so sick, there was always something that needed organizing or cleaning. The more I thought about it, the more ashamed I felt for doubting her. Here was a woman who had married my son and embraced our entire family, who visited regularly and offered support during the most difficult time of our lives, and I was repaying her kindness with suspicion and distrust. "Robert," I whispered one evening as he dozed in his chair, "I think I'm losing my mind. I keep thinking Lisa is up to something, but that's crazy, isn't it?" He stirred slightly, his eyes opening just enough to focus on my face. "Trust your instincts, Maggie," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "You've always been a good judge of character." But I dismissed his words as the rambling of a man weakened by illness and medication. After all, what could Robert possibly know that I didn't? I was the one home. 3 days after we laid Robert to rest, I finally worked up the courage to start going through his personal belongings. The funeral director had been kind but clear. Families often need time to process before handling these practical matters. I'd spent those 3 days in a fog, accepting casseroles from neighbors and returning condolence calls, but avoiding the one task that would make Robert's absence feel final. His closet still smelled like his aftershave, a woody scent I'd grown to associate with Sunday mornings and special occasions. I started with his suits, carefully checking each pocket before folding them for donation. In his navy blazer, I found a grocery list in his handwriting from months ago, and I had to sit down on our bed as tears overwhelmed me. Such a simple thing, but seeing his familiar script made the grief crash over me like a wave. I worked methodically through his dresser drawers, setting aside items for our children and grandchildren. His watch collection would go to David, his cufflinks to Michael when he got his life together, his reading glasses to Sarah, who always borrowed them anyway. It felt good to imagine pieces of Robert living on with the people he loved most. By afternoon, I'd made significant progress, but there was one task I'd been avoiding: checking Robert's safe. It was a small fireproof box he kept in the back of our bedroom closet behind his winter coats. He'd installed it 20 years ago after a break-in at our neighbor's house, and over the years it had become the repository for our most important documents and treasures. I knew the combination by heart: our wedding anniversary, May 12th, 1978. Robert had made sure I memorized it years ago, insisting that if anything ever happened to him, I'd need access to everything inside: insurance papers, the deed to our house, my grandmother's diamond earrings, the silver dollars his father had given him, emergency cash, and the original copy of his will. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the dial. The safe had been Robert's domain, and opening it felt like trespassing on sacred ground. But I needed to gather the insurance documents for the lawyer's appointment next week. The heavy door swung open with a soft click, and my heart stopped. The safe was completely empty. I stared into the vacant space, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The neat stacks of documents that should have been there, the small velvet boxes containing my jewelry, the emergency fund Robert had always kept just in case. Everything was gone. "No, no, no," I whispered, reaching inside to feel along the walls, as if the contents might be hiding in some corner I couldn't see. But my fingers found nothing except cold metal and the faint outline of dust where papers had once been stacked. I sat back on my heels, my mind racing. Could Robert have moved everything before he died? But when? And why? He'd been too weak in his final weeks to manage something like this alone, and he certainly would have told me about such an important change. With shaking hands, I reached for the phone and dialed David's number. Maybe Robert had given him the combination. Maybe there was some logical explanation I wasn't seeing through my grief. "Mom." David's voice sounded distracted, busy. "How are you holding up?" "David, I need to ask you something. Your father's safe. Do you know if he moved anything out of it recently?" There was a long pause. When David spoke again, his voice had changed, become careful and measured. Mom, Lisa mentioned you might start having some memory issues. Grief can do that to people. Maybe you moved those things somewhere else and just forgot? The dismissive tone in my own son's voice hit me harder than the empty safe had all day, the one who saw Lisa's genuine care and concern. I was just a tired, grieving woman letting stress cloud her judgment. I couldn't sleep that night. David's words echoed in my mind. Lisa mentioned you might start having memory issues. When had Lisa said that? And why was my son discussing my mental state with his wife instead of talking to me directly? By morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to confront Lisa face to face and get answers about what happened to Robert's safe. Lisa arrived at 10 o'clock sharp when I called and asked her to come over. She looked as polished as always. Crisp white blouse, perfectly styled hair, and that warm smile that had once made me feel so lucky to have her as a daughter-in-law. But today, something was different in her eyes. A coldness I'd never noticed before, or maybe had refused to see. "Mom, Margaret, you sounded upset on the phone," she said, settling onto our living room sofa like she owned it. "I'm so worried about you." "David and I both are." "Lisa, I need to ask you something directly," I began, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "Robert's safe is empty. Everything is gone. The insurance papers, my jewelry, the emergency cash, even his will. Do you know anything about this?" For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw something flicker across her face. Not surprise, not concern, but calculation. Then the smile returned. But it was different now. Colder, more predatory. "Oh, Mom, Margaret," she said with a soft laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Robert took care of all of that before he passed. He wanted to make sure David would have everything he needed to handle the estate properly." "That's impossible," I said firmly. "Robert was too weak those last few weeks to do anything like that, and he would have told me." Lisa's expression shifted again, and this time she didn't bother hiding the steel beneath her sweet exterior. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, placing it on the coffee table between us with deliberate care. "Robert asked me to give you this after the funeral," she said. "He made me promise to wait until you were ready to hear it." With trembling fingers, I unfolded the paper. It was written on Robert's personal stationery in what looked like his handwriting, though the letters seemed shaky and uncertain. The message was brief but devastating. "Margaret, I've given everything to David and Lisa. They will take better care of our affairs than you can. Don't fight this. It's what I want." "This isn't real," I whispered, staring at the words. Robert would never write something like this. He would never exclude me from decisions about our own property. Lisa leaned forward, and for the first time since I'd known her, her true nature showed completely. Gone was the loving daughter-in-law, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "Robert was very clear about his wishes in those final days," she said, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "He told me he was worried about your ability to handle complex financial matters. He said you'd always been too trusting, too naive about money." "You're lying," I said, my voice stronger now despite the shock. "Am I?" Lisa stood up, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. "Robert saw how you've struggled with even simple decisions lately. Forgetting appointments, misplacing things, getting confused about conversations. He was protecting you from yourself, Mom, Margaret." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, not just the theft, but the systematic way she'd been setting this up, poisoning my son against me, making everyone believe I was losing my mind. "David believes me," she said softly as she gathered her purse. "And really, who else matters?" After Lisa left, I sat in stunned silence, staring at the forged letter in my hands. The handwriting looked convincingly like Robert's, but something felt wrong about it. The pressure of the pen strokes was uneven, and some of the letter formations seemed forced. as if someone had been carefully copying his style. But my immediate concern wasn't the forgery. It was understanding how deep this betrayal went. I remembered Robert's mysterious envelope from his coat pocket. If you're reading this, they think I'm already gone. What had he meant by they? Had he known about Lisa's plan before he died? With newfound determination, I began searching through Robert's belongings more systematically. In his desk drawer, I found his appointment calendar from the past year. As I flipped through the pages, a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. Starting 6 months ago, there were entries in Lisa's handwriting. Doctor's appointments, medication pickups, even grocery runs. She had been inserting herself into every aspect of our lives, learning our routines, our schedules, our vulnerabilities. But it was what I found in Robert's old briefcase that truly revealed the scope of their conspiracy. Hidden beneath some old tax returns were phone records that Robert must have requested from our landline company. The pages were covered with his handwriting, circling numbers and making notes. One number appeared dozens of times over the past 3 months, always during hours when I was out of the house. I dialed the number with shaking fingers. "Hartwell and Associates, estate planning," a professional voice answered. My heart sank. "Could you tell me if anyone from the Thompson family has been consulting with your firm recently?" "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss client information. However, if you're Margaret Thompson, Mrs. Lisa Thompson has been trying to reach you about finalizing some paperwork regarding your husband's estate." Mrs. Lisa Thompson? She'd been using my name. I hung up and immediately called our family lawyer, the man who'd handled Robert's real will 20 years ago. What I learned made me physically sick. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so glad you called," Mr. Patterson said. "I've been quite confused. Last month, a woman claiming to be you called to cancel your appointment and said you'd be using different representation. When I asked to speak with Robert, she said he was too ill for phone calls." "Mr. Patterson, that wasn't me. I never canceled anything." "Dear God," he whispered. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to know. Someone has been impersonating you. They've been in contact with the bank about changing beneficiaries on Robert's life insurance policy. I have documentation here that shows attempted changes to your joint accounts, requests for copies of the house deed, even inquiries about reversing the power of attorney you gave Robert." The room spun around me. This wasn't just about stealing items from a safe. This was a calculated attempt to steal my entire life, my home, my financial security, my identity. "There's more," Mr. Patterson continued grimly. "I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be your son David, saying you'd been showing signs of dementia and needed to be placed in a care facility. They wanted to know about procedures for taking over your affairs." I could barely speak. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on what I'm seeing here, at least 6 months, maybe longer. Mrs. Thompson, this appears to be an elaborate scheme to systematically strip you of everything you own while making it look like you're mentally incompetent to handle your own affairs." The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. Robert hadn't just discovered their plan. He'd been collecting evidence. That's why he'd requested the phone records, why he'd been asking questions, why he'd left me that cryptic message. He died knowing that his own family was planning to destroy the woman he'd loved for 45 years. That evening, alone in the house that might soon be stolen from me, I collapsed completely. The weight of everything I'd discovered crashed down like an avalanche, and I found myself on the kitchen floor, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. The same kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals for my family, where I'd bandaged scraped knees and celebrated report cards, where I'd held my children during their teenage heartbreaks. I crawled to the living room and pulled out our old photo albums, the ones I'd lovingly maintained for decades. Through my tears, I stared at pictures of David as a little boy, gap-toothed and grinning, his arms wrapped around my neck. There he was on his first day of kindergarten, so nervous that he'd made himself sick, clinging to my leg until I promised to wait by the school fence. I remembered sitting up with him through countless nights when he had ear infections, reading him story after story until he finally fell asleep in my arms. "Where did I go wrong?" I whispered to his 5-year-old face in the photograph. I turned the pages, finding picture after picture that documented my life of sacrifice. There was the photo from David's high school graduation, where I wore a dress I'd bought at a thrift store because I'd spent my clothing budget on his senior trip. I looked so proud, so happy, completely unaware that this boy I'd given everything to would one day abandon me without a second thought. The Christmas morning photos were the worst. Year after year of my children's joy as they opened presents I could barely afford, while I sat in my old robe, content with a cup of coffee and their happiness. The bicycle for David when he was 8, I'd worked extra shifts for 3 months to save for it. The laptop for his college applications. I'd sold my mother's china set to make that happen. I found the photo from David's wedding day where I stood beaming beside him and Lisa. She looked radiant in her designer dress, her smile perfect for the cameras. I was wearing the same dress I'd worn to my own mother's funeral because it was the only formal dress I owned. But I hadn't cared about my appearance that day. I was just so happy that my son had found love. "How could you do this to me?" I asked his wedding photo, my tears dripping onto the protective plastic. The memories flooded back with painful clarity. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred, every dollar I'd spent on their happiness instead of my own future. When David needed money for his medical residency, I'd taken out a second mortgage. When Lisa wanted a big wedding, I'd contributed my entire retirement savings. When they bought their first house, I'd co-signed the loan even though it put my own financial security at risk. I remembered the sleepless nights I'd spent worrying about their future, praying they'd be happy and successful. I'd asked so little in return, just love, respect, and maybe a phone call once in a while. Instead, they were planning to lock me away in some facility while they divided up everything Robert and I had worked our entire lives to build. The betrayal felt like dying while still breathing. My own son, the boy I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through infancy, supported through every challenge, and celebrated through every success. He was willing to let his wife destroy me. Not for survival, not out of desperation, but for greed. Pure, simple greed. I cried until my body had no tears left, mourning not just for what I'd lost, but for the son I thought I'd raised, who apparently never existed at all. I woke up the next morning on the living room floor, surrounded by scattered photographs and dried tears on my cheeks. The morning sunlight streaming through Robert's favorite window felt different somehow, sharper, clearer. As I slowly sat up, my bones aching from sleeping on the hardwood floor, something fundamental had changed inside me during the night. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My silver hair was disheveled, my eyes were swollen from crying, and I looked every bit the helpless old woman that Lisa wanted everyone to believe I was. But behind those tired eyes, something new was burning, a flame I hadn't felt in decades. "No," I said out loud to my reflection, "I am not helpless. I am not confused, and I am not going down without a fight." I walked into Robert's study, the same room where I'd caught Lisa rifling through our files, and sat in his leather chair. For 45 years, I'd been the supporting character in other people's stories. The devoted wife, the sacrificing mother, the helpful grandmother. I'd made myself smaller so others could shine brighter, given away pieces of myself until I'd almost forgotten who I was underneath all that selflessness. But I wasn't just a caregiver or a victim. I was a woman who had managed a busy hospital ward for 30 years, dealing with life and death decisions every single day. I'd balanced budgets, supervised staff, and handled crises that would have broken lesser people. I'd raised 3 children, kept a household running, and nursed my husband through terminal cancer while never missing a beat. The woman who could do all that was not the weak, confused person Lisa wanted me to appear to be. I remembered my nursing supervisor, Mrs. Chen, who used to say, "Margaret, you have the spine of steel wrapped in velvet. People underestimate you because you're kind, but kindness isn't weakness. It's a choice. And when kind people finally get angry, they become unstoppable." Lisa had made a critical error in her calculations. She saw my kindness and mistook it for stupidity. She saw my grief and assumed it meant defeat. She believed that because I'd spent my life caring for others, I wouldn't know how to fight for myself. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I thought about Robert's final message. If you're reading this, they think I'm already gone. But Robert wasn't gone, not entirely. He'd left me clues, evidence, a trail of breadcrumbs that would lead to their downfall. He'd trusted that I would be strong enough to use what he'd given me. He'd believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Standing up from his chair, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my nursing days, the calm, focused determination that came before handling a crisis. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My mind wasn't clouded by grief and confusion. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt completely clear about what needed to be done. "You picked the wrong woman to mess with," I said softly, looking around the study where this nightmare had begun. "You wanted to play games with a helpless old lady. Let me show you what this old lady can do when she stops being nice." I walked to the phone and began making a list in my head. First, I would call Mr. Patterson back and get copies of everything Lisa had tried to change. Then I would contact the bank, the insurance company, and anyone else who had been contacted by someone impersonating me. I would gather evidence, build a case, and methodically destroy the web of lies they'd constructed. They thought I was down for the count. They were about to discover they'd only awakened a sleeping giant. Over the next week, I transformed myself into someone I'd never been before, a woman with a mission. Every morning, I woke with purpose, armed with a legal pad covered in notes and a strategy that grew more sophisticated by the day. If Lisa and David wanted to play dirty, I would beat them at their own game, but I would do it the right way, with evidence, documentation, and the law on my side. My first call was to Mr. Patterson, who became my invaluable ally. Within 2 days, he'd provided me with copies of every fraudulent document Lisa had attempted to file, every forged signature she'd submitted, and every false claim she'd made while impersonating me. The paper trail was extensive and damning. Lisa had been busy, but she'd also been sloppy, leaving fingerprints all over her crimes. Next, I contacted my bank and discovered that Lisa had attempted to change beneficiaries on 3 different accounts, claiming I was mentally incompetent. The bank manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, was horrified when I showed her the documentation proving the fraud. "Mrs. Thompson, we've seen elder abuse cases before, but nothing this systematic. This woman has been planning this for months. But my most crucial step was one that would have seemed impossible to the grieving widow I'd been just a week earlier. I drove to an electronics store and, with the help of a patient young clerk, purchased a small recording device and 2 hidden cameras. The clerk, thinking I wanted to monitor a caregiver, showed me how to position them discreetly and download the recordings to my laptop. "These cameras are motion activated," he explained, "and they store everything in the cloud. Even if someone finds and destroys them, you'll still have all the footage." That evening, I carefully installed 1 camera behind a picture frame in the living room and another inside Robert's old clock in the study. If Lisa was going to continue her charade, I would capture every word, every admission, every moment of her duplicity. I also began reaching out to people Lisa didn't know I could contact. Robert's doctor was shocked to learn about the forged will and immediately provided a written statement confirming that Robert had been mentally sharp until his final day. "Your husband was worried about someone taking advantage of you," Dr. Martinez told me. He specifically asked me to document his mental competency in case anyone tried to claim otherwise. The most satisfying call was to Robert's old colleague from his accounting firm. Tom had retired the same year as Robert, but they'd remained friends. When I explained what was happening, Tom was furious. "Maggie, Robert came to see me about 6 weeks before he passed. He said he suspected someone was planning to forge documents after his death. He asked me to witness his signature on some papers and keep copies in my safe." "What kind of papers?" I asked, my heart racing. "A new will, properly witnessed and notarized. Plus a letter explaining everything he'd discovered about Lisa's plans. He said if anything ever happened to you, I should take everything to the authorities." I nearly dropped the phone. Robert had been 3 steps ahead of them the entire time. But my masterstroke was yet to come. I called Lisa and, in my sweetest, most confused voice, told her I was ready to sign whatever papers she needed to help David handle everything. I suggested we have a family meeting to sort everything out once and for all. "Oh, Mom Margaret," she purred over the phone. "I'm so glad you're finally being reasonable about this. David will be so relieved." What Lisa didn't know was that this meeting would be her downfall, recorded in high definition and witnessed by people she'd never see coming. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, and I spent the entire morning orchestrating what would become the most important performance of my life. I'd invited everyone under the pretense of finalizing Robert's estate and making sure we're all on the same page. My voice had trembled with just the right amount of confusion when I called each family member, playing the part of the overwhelmed widow who finally needed help understanding complicated paperwork. David arrived first, looking uncomfortable, as he avoided making direct eye contact with me. My heart ached seeing him fidget in the living room where he'd played as a child, but I steeled myself for what was coming. Sarah came next, genuinely concerned about me and unaware of the conspiracy brewing in her own family. Michael, my youngest, brought his girlfriend, Emma. Both of them clearly puzzled about why they'd been summoned for what I'd described as a simple family discussion. But I hadn't just invited family. Mrs. Chen, my former nursing supervisor, arrived with a casserole and her signature no-nonsense attitude. "I hope you don't mind," I told the gathering, "but Mrs. Chen has been such a help to me these past weeks." What they didn't know was that Mrs. Chen had been a legal witness in dozens of hospital cases and knew exactly what she was observing. Tom, Robert's old colleague, knocked on the door right on schedule, carrying what appeared to be a simple briefcase but actually contained the evidence that would expose everything. "Sorry I'm late, Maggie," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I brought those papers Robert wanted me to keep safe." Lisa arrived last, making a grand entrance in a new designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly budget. Her smile was radiant, her confidence absolute. She clearly believed this meeting was her victory lap, the moment when she'd finally get me to sign away everything Robert and I had worked for. "Mom Margaret," she said, embracing me with theatrical warmth, "I'm so proud of you for taking this step. It's exactly what Papa Robert would have wanted." As everyone settled into the living room, I could feel the tension building like the pressure before a storm. David kept glancing between Lisa and me, clearly uncomfortable, but committed to supporting his wife. Sarah looked confused by the formality of the gathering. Michael was checking his phone, probably wondering why he'd had to drive 2 hours for a family meeting. I moved around the room, playing the perfect hostess, offering coffee and cookies, while secretly checking that my recording devices were positioned correctly. The cameras were rolling, capturing every face, every gesture, every word that was about to be spoken. "Well," I said finally, settling into Robert's old chair with a stack of papers in my lap, "I suppose we should get started. Lisa, you mentioned there were some documents I needed to sign?" Lisa's eyes lit up with barely contained excitement. She pulled out a leather folder thick with papers, spreading them across the coffee table with practiced efficiency. "These will just make everything official," she said smoothly. "Transfer of the house deed, Changes to the insurance beneficiaries, power of attorney arrangements, all the things Robert wanted David to handle. What Lisa didn't notice was Mrs. Chen quietly taking notes in the corner, or Tom's briefcase positioned within easy reach, or the way Sarah's expression was shifting from confusion to concern as she heard her sister-in-law discussing taking control of her mother's assets. The trap was set. All that remained was springing it. As Lisa spread her fraudulent documents across the coffee table, her confidence radiating through the room, I felt a moment of perfect calm settle over me. This was it. The moment Robert had prepared me for, the moment I would honor his memory by protecting myself and exposing the truth. "These documents look very thorough, Lisa," I said, picking up the forged will with steady hands. "But before I sign anything, I think everyone should know what Robert really wanted." Something in my tone must have shifted, because Lisa's smile flickered for just an instant. David looked up from his phone, suddenly alert. Sarah leaned forward, sensing the change in atmosphere. I reached beneath my chair and pulled out the real estate documents that Lisa had been trying to forge. You see, Robert was very specific about his wishes. He wanted to make sure I was protected from anyone who might try to take advantage of me during my grief. "Mom, what are you talking about?" David asked, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty now. "I'm talking about the fact that your wife has been systematically stealing from me for months," I said clearly, my nursing supervisor voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "Lisa, would you like to explain to everyone how you've been impersonating me to banks and lawyers?" The color drained from Lisa's face. "That's ridiculous. You're confused, Mom Margaret. We've talked about this." "Have we?" I stood up and walked to Robert's old clock, retrieving the hidden camera with theatrical precision. "Because I have recordings of every conversation we've had since the funeral. Would you like everyone to hear the one where you admitted Robert gave you everything because I was too naive to handle my own affairs?" The room exploded into shocked gasps. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Michael sat forward, suddenly understanding why he'd been invited. Mrs. Chen continued taking notes with professional detachment while Tom quietly opened his briefcase. "That's impossible," Lisa stammered, but her usual composure was cracking. "You don't know how to use technology like that." "You're right, I didn't," I said with a smile, "but I learned. Just like I learned that you've been forging my signature, just like I learned that you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, and just like I learned that you've been planning this since before Robert even died." David finally found his voice. "Mom, even if Lisa made some mistakes in trying to help—" "Mistakes?" I interrupted, pulling out the bank records Mr. Patterson had provided. "David, your wife attempted to steal $43,000 from our savings account. She tried to change the beneficiaries on your father's life insurance policy. She forged documents to claim ownership of this house." "You can't prove any of that," Lisa said, but her voice was getting desperate. "Actually, she can," Tom said quietly, rising from his corner chair. "Robert asked me to witness and notarize his real will 6 weeks before he died. He also left detailed documentation of everything he'd discovered about your plans, Lisa." Tom opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of legal documents. "Robert suspected what you were doing and spent his final weeks collecting evidence. Phone records, bank statements, copies of the forged documents you thought no one would ever see." But the final twist came when I walked to the picture frame and retrieved the second camera. "Lisa, remember when you whispered to me at Robert's funeral? 'Don't cry. He's not really gone. You'll see tonight.' You were right. Robert isn't gone. He's been protecting me from beyond the grave, and today everyone gets to see exactly who you really are." As I pressed play on the recording device, Lisa's own voice filled the room, cold and calculating, admitting to everything. 13th resolution. With undeniable evidence of fraud and elder abuse, Lisa faced criminal charges and lost all claims to Robert's estate. David, ashamed and devastated by his wife's actions and his own betrayal of his mother, begged forgiveness through tears. Margaret kept the house and financial security Robert intended for her. More importantly, she discovered her own strength and refused to let anyone take advantage of her kindness again. She began volunteering to help other elderly people avoid similar scams. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours of our family meeting, Lisa was facing federal charges for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. The recording devices had captured everything: her admissions of forgery, her cold calculations about my supposed mental decline, and most damning of all, her detailed discussions with David about how to handle the old woman once I was removed from my own home. The legal process moved faster than I'd expected. Mr. Patterson worked with the district attorney's office to present what prosecutors called one of the most well-documented cases of elder fraud they'd ever seen. Robert's meticulous record-keeping, combined with my recordings and the testimony of witnesses, created an airtight case that left no room for Lisa's lawyers to maneuver. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when I received a call from Mrs. Rodriguez at the bank. "Mrs. Thompson, I wanted you to know that not only have we restored all your accounts to their original status, but Lisa's attempt to access your funds actually triggered an insurance policy your husband had purchased specifically for this type of fraud. You're receiving an additional settlement that should cover all your legal fees, and then some." Even in death, Robert was still taking care of me. The criminal trial was a media sensation. Local news stations picked up the story of the funeral fraud case, and I found myself briefly famous as the widow who outsmarted her scheming daughter-in-law. But more importantly, the publicity led to dozens of other elderly victims coming forward with similar stories. I testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger elder abuse protections, turning my pain into purpose. David's fate was more complicated and, honestly, more heartbreaking. While prosecutors determined he hadn't been actively involved in the fraud scheme, his willing blindness and his cruel dismissal of my concerns had destroyed our relationship beyond repair. He appeared at my door one evening, 6 months after Lisa's conviction, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he sobbed on my front porch. "I was weak, and I let her convince me that you were losing your mind. I should have listened to you. I should have protected you." Looking at my son, gray-haired now, aged by the scandal and his wife's imprisonment, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of tired compassion. "David," I said quietly, "your father and I raised you to be better than this. The fact that you chose not to be better isn't something I can fix." I didn't slam the door in his face, but I didn't invite him in either. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with apologies. Sarah and Michael, horrified by what their brother had allowed to happen, rallied around me with fierce protectiveness. They helped me set up new security systems, reviewed all my financial accounts, and made sure I had multiple people checking on my well-being. The irony wasn't lost on me. The children I'd sacrificed the least for were the ones who loved me most faithfully. A year later, I was living comfortably in the house Robert and I had shared for 45 years, surrounded by the garden we'd tended together and the memories we'd created. Lisa was serving a 7-year sentence in federal prison. David had moved across the country, unable to face the daily reminder of his choices. And I had discovered something unexpected in my 70s, that I was stronger, more capable, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that love doesn't make you weak. It makes you fierce when the people you love need protecting, even when that person is yourself. 2 years have passed since that Sunday afternoon when I exposed Lisa's betrayal in my own living room. And I'm sitting in that same chair where Robert used to read his mysteries, watching the sunrise through the window he loved so much. The garden is thriving, his tomatoes and my roses growing side by side, just as we planned. But I'm not the same woman who once sat crying on this kitchen floor, surrounded by scattered photographs and broken dreams. The house is filled with new sounds now. Sarah's children visit every weekend, their laughter echoing through rooms that once felt haunted by betrayal. Michael stops by after work twice a week, sometimes bringing Emma, who's become like a daughter to me. We cook dinner together and they listen to my stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive in ways that feel natural and healing. I've become something I never expected in my 70s, an advocate. The Margaret Thompson Foundation for Elder Protection now helps dozens of families each year, providing legal resources and support for seniors facing financial abuse. When people ask me how I found the strength to fight back, I tell them the truth. Strength was always there, hidden beneath years of putting everyone else first. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us who we really are underneath all the roles we play. The local newspaper did a follow-up story on me last month, calling me a hero for seniors everywhere. I laughed when I read that. I'm not a hero. I'm just a woman who refused to let grief make her helpless, who decided that love isn't just about giving everything away, but also about protecting what matters. Lisa writes me letters from prison sometimes, long, rambling apologies filled with self-pity and blame for everyone except herself. I don't respond, but I don't throw them away either. They serve as a reminder of how easily manipulation can disguise itself as care, how important it is to trust your instincts even when everyone around you suggests you're wrong. David sent a Christmas card last year. No return address, just his signature and the words, "I think about you every day." I felt sad when I read it, but not the crushing sadness I once expected. Some relationships don't survive betrayal, and that's not always a tragedy. Sometimes it's just the natural consequence of choices people make. But Robert's presence is still everywhere in this house, and I've learned that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. His final act of protection, those carefully collected documents and that cryptic message in his coat pocket, saved me from losing everything we'd built together. He knew I was stronger than I believed myself to be, and he trusted me to prove him right. Every morning when I make my coffee in the kitchen where I once collapsed in despair, I remember something my old supervisor, Mrs. Chen, used to say, "The strongest steel goes through the hottest fire." I went through my fire, and I came out stronger, wiser, and more determined to live the rest of my life on my own terms. Never underestimate the power of someone who has spent their life caring for others. That same love, dedication, and intelligence that built a family can become an unstoppable force when protecting what matters most. What would you do if your own family betrayed your trust like this? Would you have the courage to fight back, or would you try to find a way to forgive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength when they needed it most.